Welcome back to Elevated Inspiration for Sunday School. Today this is our lesson 11. The subject in some of your books is promise and peace. I like that subject because it's something that we want to experience since we're living in a pandemic at this time. And when are we going to be free and we can go back to our normalcy? But this lesson right here is come to encourage us. So let's jump into it. We're coming from the book of Zechariah. Who is Zechariah? Actually, you look in the Bible, it is a common name. Actually, 30 men throughout the Bible is named Zechariah. This particular Zechariah is one of the minor prophets. He comes from a priestly family. He basically what he does is he encourages the returning exile. So if you break down the history of the Jews when we follow in the Old Testament, you have um, the reign of King David, which is their first king, and a series of kings after him, and then they go into exile uh, in the Babylonian captivity that lasted for 70 years. Now, even though we know the northern kingdom goes into um, exile on the Assyrian. However, we're focusing right now on the southern kingdom, the Judah kingdom. They go into Babylon, they stay there for 70 years, and then they come out of exile. So basically, when did this book take place? Zechariah recorded his ministry occurred after the Babylonian exile. Now, if you actually look at Zechariah 1 and 1 and then 7 and 1, we can actually put a date here. So we're looking at 520 BC to the late 518 BC. So basically what this is saying is that they have been allowed to return back to Jerusalem. But if you notice, the return back to Jerusalem is only a remnant, only a small group. Because as you read the book of Nehemiah, and a couple of Sundays ago, we had the book of Esther. This is actually taking place after the exile, and we see that there were several people stayed in Babylon, several of the Jews. So we're only looking at a few people that goes back. So they go back under Ezra. If you actually read the book of Ezra, they actually begin to build a temple. So they are in the process of building the temple. So when he writes the book of Zechariah, the setting is in Jerusalem. It's in the land of Judah. It's 20 years after the people returned from exile. So we are focusing a date here, and you kind of see what is happening. So basically, when they return back, only a remnant returns back. What happens is they start building the temple, and then there is a stop, and the people are actually discouraged as they begin to build that temple. And this happens so often in our lives that we start a project and then there's a stop in that project. So what Zechariah does, he give us he in this book there's a lot of visions that God give him. Most of the signs God continue to favor seem to have disappeared. Because if you actually look at the seventh chapter, if you have time, please go and read the seventh chapter. Because basically in the seventh chapter, they ask a question, and God gives them an answer. And the question is, every year, twice a year, they fast and they cry about the captivity. And it actually said, when you fasted and lamented for these 70 years, did you really fast for me? That's in the seventh chapter in the fourth chapter. Seventh chapter in the fourth verse. So basically, God is saying, when you have done that for the past 70 years, do you actually do it for me? And the seventh chapter actually give them a history lesson. So here we are now. Our lesson for Sunday school. After this history lesson, we're going to look at what takes place with the results of this history lesson. We see God's promises in the eighth chapter. Okay. All right, so here we are, the eighth chapter. If you look at the eighth chapter, and if you don't mind, pause for a few minutes and read these first three verses here. And after you pause, I highlighted some things that I picked up from this. So again, the people are actually discouraged, and what God is saying to them is, I still love you. I am jealous for Zion. Zion is reference to Jerusalem. I'm jealous for her. Remember we talk about parallelism, how there's a repeat. I will return to Zion and dwelled in Jerusalem. So, and then he says, this is going to be a faithful city, and I'm going to call it a holy mountain. And then if you look at the next outline is verses 4 through 8. And if you just pause right now and read this, and then after you pause, we're going to continue. Here, God is saying, once this city is going to be vibrant again, there's going to be people walking, they're going to live of old age, there's going to be kids playing, and I'm going to bring not only my people back, but I'm actually going to reach out all over the world, and I'm going to bring them back to Jerusalem. And if you notice in the last portion of that verse, it says, they will be my people, and I will be faithful and righteous to them as their God. And then if you look at the prosperity, again, if you pause, and I want you to read those verses there, this is verses 11 through 17. And what I pull out of this verses is that if you look here, it says how prosperous this land is going to be. Because what they're looking at this point in time is an unprosperous territory. Remember, right before the Babylonian captivity, they have come in, they have wiped out. The walls are actually torn down because later Nehemiah has to come and build the walls of the city. So everything looks in ruin. They have started work on this temple and it has stopped. And what he's telling them is that you got to look beyond the broken walls. And then he tells them right in the middle of the verse 13, do not be afraid. Let your hands be strong. I like that because the word hands represents stability, represents strength. And then at the end it says, I have determined to do good again to Jerusalem and Judah. Do not be afraid. And then we end with this verse right here. These are the things you are to do. Now, I like this because he goes back and he really repeats this. The commandments, look at it. Speak the truth to each other. Render truth and sound judgments in your court. Do not plot evil against each other, and do not love to swear falsely. I hate all of this, declares the Lord. And we're back to those biblical principles that we have to live, like Jesus says in the New Testament. Love your neighbors. Do good unto them. And even them that despitefully use you, we have to love them also. So what do you think? What kind of change should you work on more? Learning to love what the Lord loves, or learning to hate what the Lord hates? Why? Think about that for a minute. Should we focus on love, or should we focus on what the Lord hates? So the spiritual riches come from this. Zechariah people knew what it was like to be poor. They had been carried off into Babylon. They had spent 70 years there. Some had died there, some stayed there, and the remnant actually returned back. So they knew what it was like to not have anything. They had been political exile. They had returned to the land. They had been plundered by their enemy. So when the prophet told them of peace and prosperity that was to come, they would appreciate it as God's gift when it became a reality. So I like this picture here because basically this tells me, are you fireproof? Are you fuel for the fire? And I thought to remember is only God offers true restoration and peace. Only God offers true restoration and peace. Thank you. See you in Sunday school.